At 7:15 a.m. on November 10, 1943, Second Lieutenant Richard Bong pushed the throttles forward on his Lockheed P-38 Lightning at Port Moresby Airfield, watching 15 other twin-boom fighters line up behind him on the crushed coral runway. 23 years old, 16 confirmed kills. Everyone told him the P-38 was too heavy to dogfight Japanese Zeros. The Lightning weighed 17,500 pounds fully loaded. The Zero weighed 5,300 pounds. In a turning fight, physics won every time. The Zero could outturn and outmaneuver the P-38 at any altitude below 20,000 feet. Conventional wisdom said, you survived Zeros by running away. Bong had different ideas. The mission was simple on paper. 16 P-38s would escort B-24 Liberator bombers attacking Rabaul Harbor on New Britain Island. Rabaul was the most heavily defended target in the Southwest Pacific. 367 Japanese aircraft based there, 5 airfields, 300 anti-aircraft guns. American bomber crews called it the place where you died. Intelligence estimated 60 to 80 Zeros would intercept any raid. The mathematics were brutal, 16 P-38s versus 80 Zeros, but the bombers had to get through. Rabaul Harbor held 92 Japanese ships supplying Japanese forces across New Guinea. Sink those ships and the Japanese offensive would collapse. Bong's wingman, Major Thomas Lynch, taxied his P-38 into position. Lynch had 13 kills. He understood Bong's tactics. The P-38 Lightning had one advantage over the Zero: speed. Twin Allison V1710 engines produced 1,475 horsepower each. Top speed at altitude, 414 mph. The Zero topped out at 331 mph. Bong had built his entire fighting style around that fact. Don't turn with Zeros, don't climb with them, use speed, dive from altitude, make one high-speed pass, kill the target, climb away before the other Zeros react. The tactic worked because most pilots couldn't shoot accurately at 400 mph in a diving attack. But Bong didn't miss. His gunnery scores at training had broken every record. The tower cleared Bong for takeoff at 7:18. The P-38's twin engines roared. Bong released the brakes. The Lightning accelerated down the runway. At 120 mph, Bong pulled back on the control yoke. The fighter lifted off. The formation assembled at 5,000 feet. 16 P-38s in 4 flights of 4 aircraft. Bong led red flight. Lynch flew his wing. Behind them, 12 B-24 Liberators lumbered into formation. The entire strike force turned northeast toward Rabaul. 280 miles. Flight time approximately 80 minutes. Intelligence had briefed the mission at 6:00 a.m. Expect heavy fighter opposition. Zeros would launch from 5 separate bases within 10 miles of Rabaul Harbor. The Japanese could put 100 fighters in the air within 15 minutes. The briefing officer said survival depended on maintaining altitude advantage and avoiding prolonged dogfights. Get in, protect the bombers, get out. Simple. Except nothing about Rabaul was simple. The formation climbed to 18,000 feet over the Solomon Sea. Bong scanned the sky continuously. Clear blue, unlimited visibility. The Japanese radar stations would track the American formation from 100 miles out. Every Zero within range would scramble. Bong checked his instruments. Fuel, 410 gallons. Ammunition, 500 rounds of 50 caliber, 150 rounds of 20 millimeter. Oxygen, flowing normally. Engine temperatures, nominal. At 8:32, the coastline of New Britain appeared. Rabaul sat on the northeastern tip. 2 massive volcanic craters formed a natural harbor. Japanese ships filled the anchorage. From 18,000 feet, Bong counted at least 30 vessels. The B-24s would have a target-rich environment if they survived. The radio crackled. Bandits, 11 o'clock high, Zeros climbing. Bong looked left. 30 aircraft rising from Rapopo Airfield. More Zeros launching from Vunakanau behind them. 50 aircraft total climbing through 10,000 feet. Bong's formation was at 18,000. The altitude advantage was temporary. Zeros climbed at 4,500 feet per minute. The P-38 climbed at 2,850 feet per minute. In 4 minutes, the Zeros would be above the Americans. Colonel Neil Kirby's voice came over the radio. Red Flight, engage the lead group. Keep them off the bombers. Bong acknowledged. He pushed the throttles forward to combat power. The P-38 accelerated to 380 mph. Lynch stayed tight on his wing. The Zeros came straight at them, head-on pass. The Japanese pilots were aggressive. Zero pilots believed their aircraft's maneuverability made them invincible. They were right in turning fights. But this wasn't a turning fight. Bong held his course. The Zero leader opened fire at 1,000 yards. Too far. Bong waited. 800 yards, 600, 400. At 300 yards, Bong squeezed the trigger. 450 caliber machine guns and 120mm cannon fired simultaneously. The Zero's engine exploded. The fighter disintegrated in mid-air. The Zero formation scattered head. Some rolled left, some right, breaking formation. Disorganized enemies were easier to kill. Bong selected a Zero pulling up into a steep climb. The Japanese pilot was trying to get above the P-38, standard Zero tactic. Bong didn't follow the Zero's climb. Instead, he rolled inverted and pulled through into a split S. The maneuver converted altitude into speed. The P-38 dove vertically, accelerating past 400 mph. Bong pulled out at 14,000 feet, 4,000 feet below the climbing Zero. The Zero pilot looked down, saw the P-38 below him, and made a fatal mistake. He rolled over and dove after Bong. The Zero pilot thought he had the advantage, but he just entered Bong's kill zone. Bong pulled back on the throttles. The P-38 decelerated. The Zero closed rapidly. The Japanese pilot opened fire at 500 yards. His bullets streamed past Bong's canopy, close but not close enough. The Zero pilot was committed to his dive. Full power, guns firing, focused entirely on killing the P-38. He never saw Lynch. Bong's wingman had followed through the split S. While Bong acted as bait, Lynch positioned himself 1,000 feet above and behind the diving Zero. Lynch opened fire at 300 yards. 3-second burst. The Zero's tail section separated from the fuselage. The fighter tumbled and hit the ocean at 8:36 a.m. 2 Zeros down in 3 minutes. But 48 more were still climbing toward the bombers. Bong climbed back to 16,000 feet. His fuel gauge showed 380 gallons. The engagement had consumed 30 gallons. The P-38 burned fuel at 65 gallons per hour at combat power. Bong calculated approximately 90 minutes of fuel remaining. Enough for the mission if nothing went wrong, but things always went wrong over Rabaul. 3 Zeros broke through the American fighter screen and dove toward the B-24 formation. The bombers were 2,000 feet below, flying straight and level toward Rabaul Harbor. If those Zeros reached the bombers, at least one B-24 would go down. 12 crew members per bomber. Bong rolled the P-38 inverted and pulled through into another dive. Lynch followed automatically. The 2 P-38s dove at 450 mph. The airframe shuddered. The Lightning wasn't designed for sustained dives above 420 mph. Pushed too hard and the wings would fold. Bong's airspeed indicator showed 470 mph. His altitude unwound rapidly. 16,000 feet, 14,000, 12,000. The 3 Zeros were ahead, 800 yards. They were focused on the bombers. They never looked behind them. The Zero's biggest weakness was the absence of a rear-view mirror. Zero pilots couldn't see behind them without turning their heads. Bong closed to 400 yards behind the trailing Zero. The Zero was 200 yards from the nearest B-24. 3 seconds from firing range. Bong fired. 2-second burst. The 50 caliber rounds punched through the Zero's fuselage. The 20mm cannon shells hit the wing root. The Zero's fuel tank exploded. The fighter rolled right and fell away. The other 2 Zeros broke off their attack and scattered. One turned left, one turned right. Bong followed the left-turning Zero. Lynch took the right. The Zero pilot pulled into a hard left turn. The fighter's turn radius was incredible. But Bong wasn't turning with him. Bong used vertical maneuvers. The P-38 climbed, rolled, and dove again. Energy management. The P-38 was always moving at 350 mph or faster. The Zero was trapped in a turning fight at 180 mph. Slow, vulnerable. If you've ever wondered how one pilot changes the rules when everyone says it's impossible, you're seeing it right now. Most people think air combat is about having the better plane. But Bong proved it's about using what you have in ways your enemy never expects. Bong came down on the Zero from above and behind. The Japanese pilot never saw him. Bong fired at 250 yards. 1 second burst. The Zero's engine stopped. Black smoke poured from the cowling. The fighter glided toward the ocean and crashed at 8:41. 4 Zeros destroyed in 9 minutes, but Bong's fuel gauge showed 340 gallons. The high-speed dives were consuming fuel faster than calculated, and 44 Zeros were still in the air. The B-24s were approaching their bombing run. The lead bomber was 3 minutes from release point. If the bombers turned away now, the entire mission failed. The Japanese ships would keep operating. American troops would keep dying. The bombers had to complete their attack, which meant the P-38s had to keep the Zeros off them for 3 more minutes. In aerial combat, 3 minutes is an eternity. Bong scanned the sky. Zeros everywhere. Above, below, left, right. 2 P-38s were smoking. One was spinning toward the ocean. The pilot didn't bail out. The second P-38 was heading south, trailing vapor. The mission was falling apart. Colonel Kirby's P-38 flashed past, chasing a Zero over Rabaul Harbor. Anti-aircraft fire from the ships filled the sky. Kirby shot down the Zero directly over a Japanese destroyer. He pulled up and climbed back toward the bomber formation. His P-38's tail showed multiple bullet holes. Bong checked his 6 o'clock. Clear. He looked up. 4 Zeros were diving on the B-24 formation from 20,000 feet. High-speed attack, the most dangerous kind. Bong's P-38 was at 14,000 feet, 6,000 feet below the Zeros. No way to intercept them before they reached the bombers, unless he did something desperate. Bong pushed both throttles past the combat power stops into war emergency power. WEP gave maximum engine output for short periods. 5 minutes maximum before the engines overheated, but 5 minutes of WEP gave 1,600 horsepower per engine. The P-38 climbed like a rocket, 4,000 feet per minute. G-forces pushed Bong into his seat. The Zeros were closing on the bombers. The lead Zero opened fire on the closest B-24. Tracers walked across the bomber's left wing. The wing started burning. Bong closed to 600 yards. His engines were screaming, temperature gauges in the red. He had maybe 60 seconds of WEP remaining before engine failure. He fired at maximum range. Most bullets missed. 3 rounds hit the trailing Zero's tail section. The Zero pilot saw the tracers and broke left. The other 3 Zeros scattered. The attack was disrupted. The burning B-24 was still flying. The pilot feathered the damaged engine and turned toward home. Bong rolled the P-38 toward the nearest Zero. His altitude was 19,500 feet. His fuel showed 310 gallons. His engine temperatures were critical, and the bombers were 30 seconds from their bombing run. 30 seconds where everything could still go catastrophically wrong. The B-24 bombardier's voice came over the radio. "Bombs away!" 12 Liberators released their payload simultaneously. 96,000 pounds of high explosives fell toward Rabaul Harbor. The bombs took 18 seconds to fall from 18,000 feet. Bong watched them arc downward. Dark shapes against blue water. The first bombs hit a Japanese transport ship amidships. The vessel broke in half. Secondary explosions rippled across the harbor as other bombs found targets. A destroyer took a direct hit. A cargo ship exploded. Fuel storage tanks on shore erupted in massive fireballs. Black smoke rose, thousands of feet. The mission was successful, but the bombers still had to get home. Bong's engine temperature gauges hadn't moved from the red zone. War emergency power had pushed the Allison engines past their limits. He pulled the throttles back to normal power. The temperatures dropped slightly but remained dangerously high. If the engine seized, he'd be gliding a 17,500-pound fighter into the ocean. No parachute would save him. The P-38 would sink in seconds. He'd drown before anyone could rescue him. The nearest American base was 280 miles away. Bong checked his fuel. 310 gallons. At normal cruise power, the P-38 burned 50 gallons per hour. That gave him 6 hours of fuel. Plenty to get home. But combat wasn't cruise. Every dive, every climb, every high-speed maneuver consumed fuel at triple the normal rate. And the fight wasn't over. 2 Zeros dove on the B-24 formation from the north, fresh aircraft from Vunakano airfield. The Japanese were rotating fighters through the battle. As soon as one group ran low on fuel, another group arrived. The Americans had no replacement aircraft. The 16 P-38s that launched from Port Moresby were all they had. 2 had already gone down. 1 was damaged and heading home. That left 13 P-38s against 46 Zeros. The mathematics kept getting worse. Bong turned toward the diving Zeros. Lynch called over the radio. "Bong, check your engines. You're trailing smoke." Bong looked at his left engine. White vapor streamed from the cowling. Coolant leak. The war emergency power had damaged something. Cylinder head gasket, most likely. The engine would keep running for maybe 20 minutes. Then it would overheat and seize. A P-38 could fly on one engine. Barely, but it couldn't dogfight. Top speed on one engine was 280 mph. Any Zero could catch him. Bong had a choice. Return to base immediately on two engines while he still had time, or stay and intercept those Zeros knowing his left engine was dying. The two Zeros were 1,000 yards from the nearest B-24, 10 seconds from firing range. Bong pushed the throttles forward. Both engines responded. The damaged left engine's temperature spiked immediately, 260 degrees Celsius. Normal operating temperature was 180. At 280 degrees, the engine would destroy itself. Bong had maybe 90 seconds at combat power. He closed on the trailing Zero at 420 mph. The Japanese pilot was focused on the bombers. He never saw Bong. At 400 yards, Bong fired. 1 second burst. The 50 caliber rounds tore through the Zero's tail. The rudder separated. The fighter yawed hard right and entered a spin. The pilot bailed out at 15,000 feet. His parachute opened. He'd survived to be captured or rescued. Most Japanese pilots didn't bail out. They considered surrender dishonorable. This pilot chose life. The second Zero saw the attack and broke hard left. Bong followed. The Zero turned inside the P-38's radius easily. The Japanese pilot was good. He reversed his turn, rolled inverted, and pulled. Through into a split S. Textbook evasion. Bong didn't follow the turn. He pulled up into a vertical climb, rolled at the top, and came down on the Zero from above. The Japanese pilot never expected vertical maneuvers. He was thinking in two dimensions. Turning, diving, but not thinking about the vertical plane. Bong exploited that. At 300 yards, Bong fired. 2-second burst. The Zero's engine exploded. The fighter fell toward the ocean, trailing fire. It hit the water at 8:44. 6 Zeros destroyed in 14 minutes. Bong's left engine temperature showed 275 degrees, rising. The coolant leak was getting worse. White smoke poured from the cowling now, visible from a mile away. Every Zero pilot could see it. They knew Bong's P-38 was damaged. Wounded aircraft attracted attacks, like sharks sensing blood. Bong's fuel gauge showed 280 gallons. The last engagement had consumed 30 gallons, more than calculated. The damaged engine was burning fuel inefficiently. He was losing fuel and losing engine power simultaneously. Lynch's voice crackled over the radio. "Bong, you need to head home. That engine won't last." Bong scanned the sky. The B-24s were turning south, heading back toward Port Moresby. Most of the remaining P-38s were forming up to escort them, but 3 Zeros were climbing toward the bomber formation from the east, low and slow. They'd timed their approach perfectly. Most American fighters were out of position, too high or too far west. Only Bong was close enough to intercept, and his left engine was dying. The 3 Zeros climbed through 12,000 feet. The B-24s were at 17,000 feet, descending to 15,000 for the return flight. The Zeros would intercept the bombers in approximately 2 minutes. Bong was at 18,000 feet, 2,000 yards away. He could reach them. Barely. He pushed both throttles forward again. The right engine responded normally. The left engine's temperature hit 285 degrees. The engine was seconds from catastrophic failure. Bong ignored it. He dove toward the 3 Zeros at 450 mph. The lead Zero pilot saw Bong coming. He broke formation and turned to engage. A head-on pass, the most dangerous type of engagement. Both aircraft closing at combined speed of 750 mph. Firing time measured in fractions of a second. Miss the shot and you'd passed your target before you could turn around. The Zero opened fire first. 7.7mm machine gun tracers streamed past Bong's canopy. The rounds were small caliber. They made holes in aluminum, but didn't have the kinetic energy to penetrate critical systems, unless they hit something vital, like the pilot. Bong held his course, 600 yards, 500, 400. At 300 yards, Bong fired. 3-second burst, the longest burst of the day. His ammunition counter showed 350 rounds remaining. He was burning through ammo faster than planned. The 50 caliber rounds converged on the Zero. The fighter's engine disintegrated. The propellers separated from the shaft. The Zero rolled inverted and dove. The pilot tried to pull out at 10,000 feet. The aircraft didn't respond. It hit the ocean at 8:47, 7 zeros destroyed. But Bong's left engine temperature had reached 290 degrees. The gauge couldn't read higher. The engine was running on borrowed time. Bong could smell burning oil through the cockpit vents. The engine would seize any second. The two remaining Zeros saw their leader go down. They broke off their attack on the bombers and turned toward Bong, 2-on-1. Both Zeros were undamaged. Both pilots were good enough to lead a formation strike. They separated, one going left, one going right. Classic pincer attack. Forced the American to choose one target and die to the other. Bong couldn't outrun them, not on one engine. He couldn't outturn them. The P-38 never could. He couldn't climb away. His damaged engine wouldn't provide enough power. He had one option: kill both Zeros before his engine failed. The Zero on the left attacked first. He dove from above, guns firing. Bong snap-rolled right. The Zero's bullets missed by feet. The maneuver put Bong in perfect position for the second Zero, the one on the right. That pilot came in from Bong's 4 o'clock low, climbing attack. Difficult angle for Bong to counter. The Zero pilot opened fire at 400 yards. His bullets hit the P-38's right boom. Metal tore. Hydraulic fluid sprayed. Bong felt the aircraft shudder. Damage to the tail structure. The P-38's control response deteriorated. Sluggish. Heavy. Lynch's P-38 dove past Bong at 500 mph. Lynch opened fire on the climbing Zero. 3-second burst. The Zero's left wing folded. The fighter tumbled out of control and crashed at 8:49. Lynch had saved Bong's life. But the first Zero was still out there. Bong's left engine temperature gauge was buried in the red zone. Then the engine started knocking. Loud metallic banging. Piston rod hammering against the cylinder wall. 5 seconds until catastrophic failure. Bong shut down the left engine. He feathered the propeller to reduce drag. The P-38 immediately slowed. 320 mph, 300, 280. The aircraft wanted to roll left. Asymmetric thrust from the single operating engine. Bong fought the controls. Full right rudder. Aileron trim maxed out. The P-38 flew sideways through the sky. The remaining Zero pilot saw the smoking engine. He attacked from behind. 6 o'clock low. Bong couldn't turn into him. The P-38 on one engine couldn't maneuver aggressively. Any sharp turn would cause a spin. Bong had to fight in a straight line. He told Lynch to break off. If the Zero killed Bong, Lynch needed to survive to escort the bombers home. Lynch refused. He stayed on Bong's wing. The Zero closed to 300 yards. He opened fire. Tracers walked up the P-38's left boom. Holes appeared in the aluminum skin. One round hit the canopy frame 6 inches from Bong's head. The plexiglass starred. Didn't shatter. Bong couldn't evade. The P-38 was flying at 260 mph. Slow. The Zero was closing at 300 mph. He'd be in perfect firing position in 5 seconds. Lynch rolled his P-38 inverted and pulled through. He came down on the Zero from directly above. Vertical attack. The Zero pilot never saw him. Lynch fired from 200 yards, point-blank range. His cannon shells tore the Zero apart. The fighter disintegrated. Pieces tumbling through the sky. The engagement was over. 8 Zeros destroyed, 7 by Bong, 1 by Lynch. The bombers were safe, turning south toward home, but Bong was flying on one engine with battle damage, 280 miles from the nearest American airfield. His fuel gauge showed 240 gallons. The damaged hydraulic system was leaking fluid. The right boom showed multiple bullet holes. His ammunition counter read 280 rounds remaining, and his radio started crackling with new contacts. More Zeros launching from Rabaul. They'd seen the damaged P-38 limping south. They were coming to finish the job. Bong calculated his options. On one engine, maximum speed 280 mph. The Zeros could do 331 mph. They'd catch him in 15 minutes, maybe less. He couldn't fight, not with damaged controls and low ammunition. He couldn't outrun them. He had to outthink them. But his right engine temperature was starting to rise. The single engine was carrying the entire load, working harder than designed. The temperature gauge showed 195 degrees. Normal was 180. It was climbing. If the right engine failed, Bong was dead. No altitude to glide home. No parachute that would save him over 280 miles of open ocean. He'd ditch in the water and drown before anyone found him. Lynch flew close formation on Bong's wing. He called over the radio. "How bad is it?" Bong checked his instruments. Fuel at 240 gallons. One engine dead. One engine overheating. Hydraulics leaking. Flight controls damaged. Radio crackling with 0 contacts closing from the north. And 270 miles still to go. Bong keyed his radio and said the only thing that mattered. "We're not dead yet." Lynch counted 6 contacts on his radar scope. 6 zeros climbing from Rabaul, heading south. They were 20 miles behind Bong's damaged P-38, closing at 50 mph per differential. The mathematics were simple. In 24 minutes, the zeros would catch them. Bong's fuel showed 240 gallons. Flying on one engine at reduced power consumed 40 gallons per hour. He had 6 hours of fuel, plenty to reach Port Moresby under normal conditions. But these weren't normal conditions. His right engine was carrying the entire load. The temperature gauge showed 205 degrees, climbing. At 220 degrees, the engine would start losing power. At 240 degrees, it would fail. Bong throttled back to reduce heat. His airspeed dropped to 240 mph. The zeros behind him accelerated. They'd closed the gap in 20 minutes now. The B-24 bombers were 10 miles ahead, flying at 180 mph. Bong couldn't keep up. The damaged P-38 was faster than the bombers, but slower than healthy fighters. He was trapped in the middle. Too slow to escape the zeros, too fast to stay with the bombers. Lynch suggested Bong fly ahead to Port Moresby alone. The damaged aircraft on the ground before something else failed. Bong refused. If those 6 zeros got past him, they'd attack the bombers. 12 B-24s carrying 144 American crew members. Bong had destroyed 7 zeros to protect those bombers. He wasn't abandoning them now. The right engine temperature hit 210 degrees at 8:56. Bong reduced power again. Airspeed dropped to 220 mph. The zeros would catch him in 18 minutes. His ammunition counter showed 280 rounds remaining. Enough for maybe 3 attacks, if he was perfect. If every burst killed a zero, if nothing jammed. Too many ifs. Lynch had 450 rounds remaining. His P-38 was undamaged, but 2 P-38s against 6 zeros wasn't a fair fight. Even with Bong's skill and Lynch's loyalty, the odds were terrible. They needed help. Bong keyed his radio. "Any American fighters in the area, this is Red Lead. We have damaged aircraft and bandits inbound. Request immediate assistance." Static. No response. The other P-38s were too far away. Already heading home with the bombers, nobody was coming. The zeros closed to 15 miles at 9:02. Bong could see them now, 6 dark specks against blue sky. They were flying in 2 3-plane formations, disciplined, organized. These weren't rookie pilots. They'd probably been flying combat missions for years. They'd survived because they were good. And they knew Bong's P-38 was damaged. They'd seen the smoke. They'd watched the engagement over Rabaul. They knew exactly what they were hunting. Bong checked his fuel, 220 gallons. His right engine temperature showed 215 degrees. The hydraulic leak had worsened. Red fluid streamed from the right boom. The fluid reservoir was nearly empty. It ran dry. Bong would lose landing gear control, flap control, brake pressure. He could still fly the aircraft, but landing would be catastrophic. Lynch moved his P-38 into defensive position. He flew 1,000 feet above and behind Bong. High cover. If the zeros attacked, Lynch would dive on them. The tactic worked if you had altitude advantage. Lynch had 1,000 feet. Not enough. The zeros could climb above him in 30 seconds. Then Lynch would be the one defending. The zeros closed to 10 miles at 9:08. Bong's right engine temperature hit 220 degrees. He couldn't reduce power any further. The P-38 was barely maintaining altitude. Any less power, and he'd start descending. Descending meant losing energy. Losing energy meant the zeros would catch him faster. He was trapped. The Japanese pilots knew it. The lead zero formation accelerated. They were making their move, closing for the kill. Bong told Lynch to break off, save himself, fly home. Lynch ignored him. The zeros closed to 5 miles, 4 minutes from firing range. Bong made a decision. He'd turn and fight, meet the zeros head on. 1 damaged P-38. Versus 6 fresh zeros. The mathematics were suicidal, but running meant dying slowly. Fighting meant dying on his terms. Bong started his turn. The damaged flight controls made the P-38 respond sluggishly. The aircraft yawed left. Bong compensated with right rudder. The nose came around slowly. Too slowly. The Zeros would see, turn, and adjust before Bong completed it. Then Lynch's voice exploded over the radio. "Contact! P-38s inbound from the south!" Bong looked back. 4 P-38s climbing from low altitude. They'd been flying at wave-top height, invisible on radar, hidden from the Zeros. American fighters returning from a separate mission. They'd heard Bong's call for help. They were coming. The 4 fresh P-38s closed at 400 mph. They reached Bong's position in 90 seconds. The lead pilot called his formation. "We've got your 6, Red Lead. Take your bird home." The 4 P-38s blew past Bong and engaged the Zeros at 9:12. The Japanese pilots scattered. They hadn't expected reinforcements. The organized attack fell apart. Bong and Lynch turned south and ran. Bong's right engine temperature showed 225 degrees, critical level. The engine was destroying itself, metal expanding beyond design tolerances, pistons scoring cylinder walls, bearings running dry, but it kept running. Bong throttled back to absolute minimum power, just enough to maintain 200 mph and hold altitude. The engine temperature stabilized at 225 degrees. Not good. Not catastrophic. Yet. His fuel gauge showed 200 gallons, 250 miles to Port Moresby. At current consumption rate, he'd arrive with 80 gallons remaining, enough for a normal landing pattern. But Bong's hydraulic system was nearly empty. Without hydraulics, he couldn't lower his landing gear normally. The gear had an emergency extension system, compressed air bottles that blew the gear down. One shot. If the emergency system failed, Bong would belly land. The P-38 would be destroyed. Bong might survive, might not. Behind them, the dogfight raged. The radio crackled with position calls, warnings, kill confirmations. The 4 fresh P-38s were slaughtering the Zeros. 2 Zeros down in the first 30 seconds. A third burning and diving toward the ocean. The remaining 3 Zeros broke off and ran north, back to Rabaul. The engagement was over. The American pilots formed up and headed south. They passed Bong at 9:20, waggling their wings. Victory salute. Bong waggled back. His right engine temperature was holding at 225 degrees. Fuel at 180 gallons. 200 miles to go. He might make it. The B-24 bombers were ahead, still lumbering south at 180 mph. Bong couldn't keep up even at reduced speed. His damaged P-38 was burning fuel faster than calculated. The single engine was working too hard, compensating for the dead engine, the drag from the feathered propeller, the damaged tail structure. At 9:35, his fuel gauge showed 160 gallons. The consumption rate had increased. He recalculated. At current burn rate, he'd reach Port Moresby with 40 gallons remaining. Maybe, if nothing else went wrong. At 9:42, something else went wrong. His right engine started running rough, uneven power. The RPM gauge fluctuated. 2,400 ARP, 2,300, 2,200. The engine was losing power. Valve train damage from the extended high temperatures. Bong adjusted the mixture, trying to smooth it out. The roughness persisted. The engine would keep running, but it wouldn't run at full power anymore. His airspeed dropped to 180 mph, same speed as the bombers. Bong was 150 miles from Port Moresby, fuel at 140 gallons. The mathematics weren't working. At this consumption rate, he'd run out of fuel 20 miles short of the airfield. 20 miles was too far to glide a P-38, especially a damaged P-38 with asymmetric thrust and compromised controls. Lynch called over the radio. "Bong, you're not going to make it on current fuel." Bong knew he had 2 options: ditch in the ocean and hope someone rescued him, or push the engine harder, increase speed, reduce flight time, and hope the engine didn't fail before he reached Port Moresby. Ditching meant certain loss of the aircraft, probable survival if the ditching went well. But ditching rarely went well. The P-38's twin boom configuration made it nose-heavy. It would flip forward on impact. The pilot would be underwater before he unbuckled. Bong chose to push the engine. He advanced the throttle. The engine responded reluctantly. RPM climbed to 2,400. Temperature spiked to 230 degrees. Airspeed increased to 210 mph. The fuel consumption doubled. Bong was gambling. Higher speed meant less flight time. Less flight time meant less fuel consumed total, but only if the engine survived. At 10:05, the coastline of Papua New Guinea appeared. Port Moresby was 80 miles inland. Bong's fuel showed 85 gallons. His engine temperature was 235 degrees. The rough running had worsened. The engine would fail any minute. But Bong was close, so close. He could see the Stanley Mountains rising ahead. Port Moresby was on the other side. He just had to clear the mountains. The P-38 climbed slowly to 8,000 feet, barely enough to clear the peaks. The engine labored. Temperature hit 240 degrees, the gauge's maximum reading. Bong didn't know how hot the engine actually was. Hot enough to smell burning metal through the cockpit vents. The engine was melting itself. At 10:18, Bong cleared the mountains. Port Moresby Airfield was 15 miles ahead, visible through the haze, the runway, the control tower, safety. His fuel gauge showed 48 gallons, enough to make it, barely, but his hydraulic pressure gauge showed 0. The system was empty. No landing gear control, no flaps, no brakes. Bong would have to use the emergency gear extension and land without flaps at high speed and stop without brakes. The runway at Port Moresby was 6,000 feet long. The P-38 landing at high speed without brakes needed 5,500 feet to stop, minimum. Any error meant running off the runway into the jungle. Bong keyed his radio. Port Moresby Tower, this is red lead. Declaring emergency. Single engine, no hydraulics, no brakes. Request straight-in approach. The tower cleared him immediately. Emergency vehicles. Scrambled. Ambulances, fire trucks, crash crews. They expected the worst. Bong descended toward the airfield. His fuel gauge showed 35 gallons. His engine temperature was off the scale. The engine was running on momentum and prayers. At 500 feet altitude, Bong pulled the emergency gear extension handle. Compressed air hissed. The main gear dropped and locked. Green lights. But the nose gear indicator showed red, not locked. The nose gear was down but not secured. On landing, it might collapse. Bong had no choice. He was committed. Fuel at 28 gallons, engine failing, no hydraulics, damaged controls, unsecured nose gear. He lined up with the runway at 140 mph. Too fast. Normal landing speed was 110 mph, but without flaps, the stall speed was 125 mph. Bong had to land fast. The P-38 crossed the runway threshold at 10:24. Main gear touched first. Hard impact. The unsecured nose gear slammed down. It held. Bong had no brakes. The P-38 rolled down the runway at 110 mph. 90, 70. The end of the runway approached, 1,000 feet remaining. The aircraft was still rolling at 50 mph. Bong turned the P-38 onto the grass overrun. The soft ground slowed the aircraft. 40 mph, 30, 20. The P-38 stopped 200 feet from the jungle. Bong shut down the right engine. It knocked twice and seized, destroyed. Complete engine failure. If it had failed 30 seconds earlier, Bong would be dead. Ground crews surrounded the aircraft. They counted 47 bullet holes. The left engine was destroyed. The right engine was ruined. The hydraulic system was empty. The tail structure was compromised. The P-38 would never fly again. But Bong climbed out of the cockpit uninjured. He'd flown a dying aircraft 280 miles on one engine with 6 Zeros chasing him. He'd protected the bombers. He'd survived. Lynch landed 2 minutes later. His P-38 was undamaged, 0 bullet holes. He'd flown perfect defensive cover. Together, they'd destroyed 8 Zeros, 7 by Bong, 1 by Lynch, in 67 minutes of combat. Intelligence officers confirmed the kills through multiple sources: ground observers, radio intercepts, wreckage spotted in the ocean. 8 Zeros destroyed. November 10, 1943 was Bong's best single mission of the war, but it wasn't his last. Bong continued flying combat missions through December 1944. His final tally, 40 confirmed kills, the highest of any American pilot in any theater of World War II. He received the Medal of Honor in December 1944. General Douglas MacArthur presented it personally. The citation mentioned Bong's extraordinary skill, his tactical innovations, his courage under impossible conditions. The P-38 Lightning's reputation changed because of pilots like Bong. The aircraft wasn't too heavy to dogfight. It was different. It required different tactics. Bong proved that speed and energy management could defeat maneuverability. Every American fighter pilot learned from his example. After the war, Bong became a test pilot. He flew the new Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star, America's first operational jet fighter. On August 6, 1945, the same day the atomic bomb destroyed Hiroshima, Bong took off from Burbank, California in a P-38. The jet's fuel pump failed on takeoff. The engine quit at 300 feet, too low to bail out, too low to turn back. Bong tried to land straight ahead. The P-80 hit the ground at 150 mph and exploded. Richard Ira Bong died instantly. He was 24 years old. He'd survived 200 combat missions, destroyed 40 enemy aircraft, earned the Medal of Honor, and redefined fighter tactics. A fuel pump failure killed him. The P-38 Lightning he'd flown in combat was put on display at the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. Except they didn't have Bong's actual aircraft. The one he flew on November 10, 1943, was scrapped, too damaged to repair. The museum displays a different P-38, same model, same paint scheme, but not the one that hunted 8 Zeros over Rabaul. That aircraft was cut apart and melted down in 1946. The metal was recycled, turned into something else. The story was almost lost. But if you're watching this, the story survives. These men changed history, and you're helping make sure nobody forgets. If this story moved you, hit that like button right now. Every like shows YouTube this story matters. Hit subscribe. We're bringing you forgotten combat stories every single day. Real pilots, real tactics, real courage. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Are you in the United States? United Kingdom? Australia? Philippines? Our community is worldwide. You're not just a viewer, you're part of preserving these memories. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Richard Bong's name doesn't disappear into silence.